Ceuta is a disaster area. Several days after the invasion at the end of July, in which over 70,000 people stormed the Spanish border with Morocco, the military came in and pushed many of the migrants back, but thousands remain sleeping on the streets or in makeshift huts at the beach. How many thousands seems to be under constant negotiation. A lot of them, more than 2,500 at last count, are unaccompanied minors who the government says it can't deport, although Morocco says they're ready to take them back. And up in Brussels, the European Union has also said that Spain can and should deport everyone. For now, it seems that everyone has an opinion, but nobody wants to take responsibility for actually doing anything. It's been more than 3 weeks since the Ceuta invasion. President Pedro Sanchez is still on vacation and shows no sign of taking this seriously, but it sure does seem serious. The other day, the police tried to clear a local beach, Playa del Trampolín. They moved a few thousand people from the beach to some circus tents, or carpas if you prefer, that had been set up as temporary shelters. People in hazmat suits came in to do some cleanup. By the next morning, the beach was full again. The local health system can't keep up with it all, but I've learned a new Spanish word, sarna, which is scabies. Apparently there's an outbreak down in Ceuta. Speaking of outbreaks, fights and turf wars are breaking out between Moroccans, Algerians, and sub-Saharan Africans for resources in the tiny Spanish enclave. Who gets to sleep where, who gets to use the bathroom, etc. Meanwhile, the government has decided it's moving 500 young migrant women from Ceuta to mainland Spain, presumably for their own safety. About a week ago, on August 15th, Moroccan police lined up to stop another mass crossing. They were successful in doing so, but what's clear to me as a result is that Morocco controls the border, not Spain. Morocco wants to take Ceuta and Melilla, which have been Spanish enclaves for centuries, and they know they don't have to take over by force if they can just make life impossible for the Spaniards who now live there. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 154, and it's about Lorca, Antifa, and Ceuta. Big shout out today to Ed. Ed is actually a monthly subscriber to the Spain to Go podcast. I think I don't give him a shout out every month, but thank you very much, Ed. If you would like to support this podcast, head on over to expatmadrid.com/donate. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. You can donate anything from 10 euros on up to however much you would like, or, like Ed, make a monthly donation. Anything helps. I appreciate it, and your donations inspire me to make more and better podcasts rather than doing some of the other things that I could be doing to make money. I've got another more boring online business, which is also more profitable. So if I make more money over here, I can spend more time on this project rather than that one, and that's good for everybody. So thank you, Ed. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. Let's get back to Ceuta. So the question on everyone's mind is this good news for the far right? Because if the Spanish far right had €1 billion to spend on an ad campaign, they couldn't do better than the photos and shaky mobile phone videos coming daily out of Ceuta. And it's all while Pedro Sanchez takes the longest vacation of any Spanish president since the early 1990s. Friday morning, listening to the Catalan radio, I learned that there was a protest scheduled for Saturday from Save Europe Act, a group dedicated to getting a popular initiative in front of the EU Commission in order to restrict non-Western immigration. Their Instagram profile focuses on remigration, which they seem to be using as a euphemism for mass deportations of illegal immigrants. One of their slogans is, "Send them back." The news on the radio said that anti-fascist groups would be staging a counter-protest in the same place, Plaza Sant Jaume, but an hour earlier. I decided I might check out one or the other for journalistic purposes. Then again, I might not. protests aren't really my cup of tea these days. There's more about the protest at the end of this episode because eventually I did go. Anyway, I see plenty of Antifa posters and t-shirts around the neighborhood. Right-wingers are less likely to put their slogans on a t-shirt for various reasons, but I assume they're around too. We won't really know how big the far right is getting until the next general election, which may be held about a year from now, in August 2027. It could be held earlier, of course, if Pedro Sanchez decides his position is untenable. But I don't think he's that kind of politician. He's been quite unpopular for years, but keeps hanging in there with his coalition of leftists, far leftists, and regional independence parties. I wrote about Sanchez's unpopularity several months ago, and since then, things have only gotten worse. Pedro Sanchez is episode 134 of this podcast. I go through some of the many reasons why people dislike him. At the time I made that episode, he was also publicly fighting with Donald Trump, so I talk a little bit about that. But the Ceuta story is not going away. I might write a couple of updates in the future if anything interesting happens. As a former immigrant myself, and now a proud Spaniard, my opinions about these things get complicated really fast. So let's talk about Lorca and the summer of 1936, because in other news, summer 2026 marks the 90th anniversary of the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. The famous coup took place on July 17th and 18th, 1936. I've written quite a bit about the Civil War over on my Chorizo Chronicles blog. It's an event that I find quite interesting. I have episodes of this podcast also about George Orwell, about Franco and the Spanish Civil War, and about Peter Kemp, who's sort of a right-wing George Orwell. Anyway, I'm not sure that a lot of young Spanish people know much about the Civil War. If you had to name several people other than Franco who were involved, could you? One person most folks probably have heard of is Federico García Lorca. He wasn't directly involved, but his story is part of the popular Civil War narrative nonetheless. Federico García Lorca was a poet and playwright who was shot on or around August 18, 1936, for reasons which are still being debated. He was gay long before that was mainstream. He also had socialist sympathies, although he wasn't a party member. In any case, he had gone to the house of his friend Luis Rosales to hide out when things got heavy in the first weeks of the war. And a few days later, the Guardia Civil came to the door. He thought he would be safe with the Rosales family because they were notably right-wing. El Español has an article about the relationship between Rosales and Lorca that is very interesting. It's called El Asesinato de Lorca, vivido por Luis Rosales. The early part of the Civil War was quite chaotic and saw people on both the left and the right settling scores if they could. It was around that time that leftists were killing priests and nuns by the thousands, for example. So it's possible that Lorca was shot for reasons more personal than political. A much later report by Franco's government described the poet as a socialist and Freemason belonging to the Alhambra Lodge, who engaged in homosexual and abnormal practices. The whole thing is still a bit of a mystery. The Spanish and English Wikipedia pages give two different dates for Lorca's death, August 18th and 19th, respectively. But in most versions of the story, he's taken to the countryside and shot. Recent attempts to find Lorca's remains as part of the larger movement for the recovery of historical memory have been unsuccessful. I used to think that poetry was a very important thing, but I couldn't get into Lorca. Maybe I just didn't find it at the right moment in my life. You can check out Poet in New York if you would like. It's available in bilingual English-Spanish editions. On the other hand, I have seen Lorca's play La Casa de Bernarda Alba a couple of times, and it's very good, if tragic. A teacher I had many years ago compared it to a Spanish Romeo and Juliet, which is true in the sense that it's about young love and ends very badly. The basic idea is that Bernarda, the domineering matriarch of the Alba household, imposes 8 years of strict mourning on her daughters when her husband dies. The daughters, all of an age when they should be out and about being courted for marriage, take this badly. When it's revealed that the youngest, Adela, is having an affair with a local man named Pepe, things get ugly really fast. The whole play is about repressive small-town lives and the need to keep up appearances. I don't know if it's the kind of deep Spanishness that might be incomprehensible to outsiders, but if your local theater group puts it on this autumn, go see it and let me know what you think. That's about all I've got for today. The other day, as I was writing the conclusion to this article, I saw that the Moroccans down in Ceuta are now planning to live on the beach permanently. Yep, they're getting fed by the Red Cross, and now they're staying, at least until they're all granted asylum. So stay tuned and subscribe to my Substack, or this podcast, for more updates on the train wreck, which is Pedro Sanchez's Spain. Go to spaintogo.substack.com to subscribe, spaintogo.substack.com. I'll also be out in the north soon on a bike tour called La Rioja and Camino del Cid that is organized by my friend Raul over at biketourinspain.com. I've done a couple of these bike tours before. You can check out biketourinspain.com for all the details. Or listen to episode 94 of this podcast, which is about my most recent one out in Extremadura. Extremadura is Spain's Wild West. It was an incredible experience. Episode 94. And like I said, go to biketourinspain.com for more. When you talk to Raul, tell him that Daniel from the podcast sent you. He will appreciate the business. He's just a local guy organizing some really cool bike adventures out there. So anyway, that will be La Rioja and Camino del Cid. It's happening in about 2 weeks, so I guess I'll be taking a week off at some point. After that, I'll be back here preparing for fatherhood. Except for those things, it looks like it's going to be an uneventful end to the summer. Just a little PS here. I eventually went to the protest about remigration from the Save Europe Act on Saturday. There was a blonde guy, Spanish as it turns out, leading several dozen people in the unfurling of a giant banner on the plaza. Then he gave a little speech with the entire Barcelona press pointing cameras and microphones at him. Over across the police line, the Antifas shouted and whistled their disapproval of the whole thing. The only side I was able to identify with were the riot police, who were good-humored and polite about the whole thing for the almost 2 hours that I was there. Anyway, like I was saying a couple of weeks ago in my previous episode about Ceuta, the revolution will not be televised, but it will certainly be a source of viral Instagram content. You can check out some other episodes of this podcast if you would like. I talked about Workers' Day protests in Barcelona earlier this year. Last summer, I did an episode on the rise of the far right because there were sort of race riots down in a town in Murcia called Torre Pacheco. That is episode 116. There's quite a bit about Pedro Sanchez's corruption in there also. It's really hard for me to like anyone on any side of Spanish politics, but I am now fully Spanish and I will be voting in the next election, so wish me luck on deciding who to vote for. You can like this podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening. You could leave a review if you are on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. There's lots of ways to support. I appreciate it all. And remember, expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page if you would like to make your support financial. Thank you very much once again from beautiful Barcelona. Hasta la próxima. Bye.